hello, everybody. Welcome.
Yeah.
I'm here with Scott, Lance, and Melody, and we're going to talk a little bit about our August 5-day intensive training so that you guys get to know what we're covering and why we're passionate about sacred geometry and why we think it's really, really important for individuals and community to actually understand and study more sacred geometry, the importance of it in terms of spiritual development and community development. And it's used for everything. You know, it's a reflection of nature. And this is a wonderful way of actually tapping into the, the divine principles of nature. And in this episode, we want to introduce you a little bit more to Lance Harding. So Scott has lined up a presentation that we can take you through the unique and very interesting work that Lance has done over many, many decades. I had the privilege of sponsoring Lance to New York a decade or so ago. And we're just really, really excited for Lance joining our team with Scott and Melody in August. And so we're going to start off with just a little overview, and then we'll go into our presentation. So Melody, how are you? You're in Turkey. So what are you up to?
Yes, I'm really fine. And I was really excited about the meeting of Portugal that you have already done. So I hope I will join the next meeting as well.
Yep.
And yeah, I'm really okay, and I'm really excited for the August meeting, because I'm preparing so many things and so many hands-ons for this meeting, for this gathering, and there are some things that I'm still doing. And also, as you mentioned, like why I am so passionate, it's because the sacred geometry is all over around us. So we would take this knowledge into the August meeting, and with the connection with Mother Nature and with the connection of the music and with cosmic relations, especially with art, science, and consciousness. So that's why I'm so excited. And I'm so excited to have this big team right now, and because this is really connected with the science understanding into the reality.
I think we just have to call this the A-team in sacred geometry for sure. And that's the other thing about the August 5-day live in-house training, is this whole idea of the tactileness of sacred geometry. And Melody's bringing all of the tools and artware, and we're really going to celebrate the drawing side and the tactile side of sacred geometry, which is a little bit tricky to get it across in our online seminars. You know, we've done some online seminars that have been very, very successful, well attended, but you just can't beat getting a whole lot of people together, sharing your same values, your same intention about, the world we live in and what we can bring to it. And so that's the really exciting thing about August, is the hands-on approach that we're going to have, theory and practice. And we're going to have a little field trip on the Sunday. We're going to go to St. John's Cathedral. Scott and Lance have done quite a bit of work with the designs of the cathedrals around the world, and how sacred geometry that wisdom of sacred geometry has been used for thousands of years in these beautiful, beautiful buildings. And we'll have a little bit of time with nature, with Melody in Central Park, the whole theme of sacred geometry and nature. So we'll see that firsthand. And then we'll continue with our drawing classes that day, but it's a 5-day intensive, and it starts on the Thursday night, August the 17th, which is an open house, $20 cash at the door, and there's going to be finger food and plenty of wine. So Scott, what are you up to?
What am I up to? Well, enjoying working with these brilliant individuals on really my favorite topic. Sacred geometry is really permanent geometry. It's the geometry of nature and of the cosmos. And it doesn't change. It actually is at the heart of the sciences. Usually when we think of it, we think of aesthetics, we think of beauty, which is true. However, it is also at the heart of the sciences and also the development and transformation of consciousness. So what we really tried to do is figure out a way we could link it back to the ancient, ageless wisdom, what the ancients were doing when they would go through these initiatory experiences, and the secrets of proportion were revealed in the Eleusinian, the Egyptian, Samothrakian mysteries, and we want to do the same with our students who work with us to bring this about, to transform consciousness. So I'm really excited to be here with Melody and Lance. They really are two of the best people in the world to be teaching all of you, and it's just a real pleasure. And we're calling this a celebration of sacred geometry, sacred geometric principles and the ageless wisdom tied together as a grand unification of the sciences, arts, and consciousness. So really looking forward to being with you on this.
Thank you, Scott. That's brilliant. Lance, it's believe me, it's just such a pleasure to be around you again, to hang out online with you again, and I'm really excited to, catch up with you when you get here in August to good old New York City. And the thing about Lance is that, like Scott, they've worked with some of the pioneers of sacred geometry in the world, who most of them have passed on. And so we're going to hear a little bit about the Prince's School of Traditional Arts, where Lance studied. Also the work with Keith Critchlow, who we've all had the pleasure to be hanging out with in the years gone by. Unfortunately, he has passed on. And of course, Jean Michel, who wrote some brilliant books. So we're in the past, we all had one of the best nights of my life was in Glastonbury, hanging out with Scott and John Michel. And I thought I could drink people under the table, but
Come on now. Come on.
John and Scott, you left me for dead. One of the best nights of my life hanging out with that guy. So Lance, we got a presentation, but let's just kind of hear why you initially got involved. What attracted you to sacred geometry?
Okay, I first met Professor Keith Critchlow in Colorado at a workshop. Got interested in his studies because I had heard about him before that, of course. And so he invited me to do an application for the school in London, which I thought at first was a crazy idea. And then I got a letter back from him when I sent that in saying that he wanted me to come to London for an interview. And I said, I can't go to London just for an interview. That's a long trip. And then I thought, you stupid idiot, you better get off your butt and go. So I did. And I ended up getting a full scholarship and studying in London for 3 years. So it paid off,
But you grew up in a strong Christian community in Utah.
Yes,
and so you were exposed to the design of the churches and the temples. So I think that's where you got your initial interest in sacred geometry. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true. The Mormon pioneers migrated to Utah after being persecuted back in Missouri and Illinois and so on. And but they built sacred temple buildings, one in Kirtland, Ohio, one in Nauvoo. And it turns out when I studied the ground plans of those buildings, they were actually using geometric principles, just like other people in the past have. So I got interested in that and started working at things like that. And then I got to do archaeology in Utah, Native American archaeology with 3 different archaeologists. And I spent years working at what's called the Parowan Gap petroglyph and observation site in southern Utah. It's actually an outdoor temple, actually, if you want to look at it that way.
Well, one day we'll do a trip to
to
that place, Lance.
Yeah.
One day I'm going to organize a
Yeah.
sacred geometry road trip. We'll all come in an old bus and arrive on your doorstep. How does that sound?
Yeah, we discovered they were using the 260-day Mayan calendar right here in Utah. So
Wow.
it's really interesting site with connections to Mesoamerica and so on. So anyway,
So
but
being in London at that time must have been a real hive of activity with sacred geometry at the traditional art school.
Oh yeah, it was tremendous. And I learned so much from Keith Critchlow and John Michel and the other people at the school, and Paul Marchant and everybody. And just a great opportunity and experience for me, because that's what I wanted to study. Okay. And so I spent 3 years, but I was also able to travel and do research in Paris, in Germany, and in Spain. And I met one of the world experts on Stonehenge, Robin Heath. Learned all about Stonehenge and everything. So it was a great experience.
Yeah, I've read some of his work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, we've lined up a presentation that Scott's going to lead us through. So, and this will cover some of the material that Lance is going to be offering in August, and so again, some of the background to sacred geometry and to Lance and Scott's work with Keith Critchlow, etc. So Scott, we'll hand it over to you.
Okay.
Let's make that presentation live.
Okay, so let me just do a couple homework things here. Our sacred geometry celebration is going to be in August. We have an open house August 17th in the 5-day intensive workshop. And of course, it's myself, Scott Olson, Melody Semeyajar, and Lance Harding. And we're really going to focus on Lance today. So it's a celebration of sacred geometry, and we're really looking at a unification of the sciences, arts, and consciousness. And what we're doing that's a little bit different is we're linking this to initiation in the ancient mystery schools. So that's really important for you to know what we're up to. Let me just say a little bit about Lance here. Dr. Harding lives in Utah, where he received his Bachelor of Arts from Brigham Young University. He worked with archaeologist Garth Norman at the petroglyph calendar site, the Parowan Gap, probably the best kept secret in the United States, the equivalent really of Machu Picchu in many respects. Lance did his doctorate on ancient canons of the human body at Visual Islamic and Traditional Arts at the Prince's Foundation School of Traditional Arts while studying art history and aesthetics under Keith Critchlow. In 2008, Dr. Harding did archaeo-astronomical research on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem with Garth Norman and astronomer and ancient calendar expert John Pratt. Lance was raised in a very strong religious setting and became very interested in the sacred temple buildings, and as a result, really became interested in the religious meaning and symbolism in sacred art and architecture in all the religious faiths. As we mentioned earlier, he had a full scholarship to V.I.T.A, where he also worked with John Michel and studied ancient knowledge and measurements. So he's studying both under Keith Critchlow and John Michel. His studies took him, as we saw, to the Temple Mount of Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. He lived with Benedictine monks for a whole week to do research on the so-called Desiderian canon of human proportion. John Michel was on his dissertation committee, and with Keith Critchlow, he went to the Louvre, to Chartres Cathedral, and to the Alhambra Palace, where he did quite a bit of study. And it's interesting, one thing that's not known very much about Lance is that he studied the Chartres Labyrinth and discovered that it is an ancient calendar that can be used like Stonehenge for predicting eclipses, and lunar cycles, and sun cycles. And his real goal is to teach in a method very similar to Keith Critchlow, the way Keith taught us. and got us to work on our own in unusual and new projects. So here's Lance receiving his doctorate from Prince Charles at St. James Palace. And if I'm not mistaken, Lance, I believe that's where he was crowned king now. Is that correct?
That's correct, in the same building. And of
Same
course,
building.
we had our graduation in there too. That was
Right. You were remarking the other day that the gold in his costume here is literally gold. Am I correct on that?
It's gold thread. I looked at it closely. I couldn't believe it. It's real gold thread. Okay.
Okay. Okay. So now here is Keith Critchlow's A-team. So you see the smile on his face. We got John Martineau, yours truly. Here's Lance Harding. And Lance has become the world's expert on canons of proportion. No question about it. So in our workshop, he'll be covering several different areas, and he's drawing from, I'll just go through this very quickly because we're going to have time to actually look at some of this briefly. Golden mandala geometry. That is one of Lance's real expertises, and he's going to use it to look at the Tabernacle of Moses, the Ark of the Covenant, Solomon's Temple, the Dendera Zodiac, and the Aztec calendar stone. He's also extremely interested in Masonic symbolism in geometry and the creation formula and the union of heaven and earth, the Hermetic maxim, as above, so below, and as below, so above. But as Lance will point out, and we are going to point out in our workshop, you need the mesocosm. You need the intermediate level to bond together the above and the below. That's what sacred geometry is all about. That's why we're so excited to share this with you. You'll also be looking at the geometry of the Great Pyramid of Khufu or Cheops, and he's also an expert on ancient squared circle geometry. Yes, some will say that's impossible. No, it is not impossible. It's through approximation, but it is actually done and it's successful. He'll also talk about the law of dualities and the law of trinities, the aesthetics of the human body in both the Egyptian and Greek canons of proportion. One of his specialties is the Vitruvian Man, after Da Vinci's drawing, as a form of spiritual rebirth and transformation of consciousness. He and I will be looking at something that we've both been working on for some time, and it helps me to actually solve and crack the code of Plato, and that is the three mean proportions, the harmonic mean, arithmetic mean, and geometric mean, and how they work with the foundational principles, what David Bohm would call the super implicate order that lies behind all of existence, and we've nailed it, and thanks to Lance Harding. And he will also be looking at the Hebrew Kabbalistic tree, and of course, the canon of Polyclitus and the Dendera Zodiac. So here is the golden mandala. So Lance, would you tell us a little bit about this incredible drawing that you have?
Okay, this geometry dates clear back to ancient Egypt, 4,000 years ago. And you notice in this drawing I have outlined in red the Pythagorean 3-4-5 triangle, the basic proportions that are found in the right angles in this figure. And Pythagoras, studied in Egypt. And this is where his theorem comes from, is from this geometry. That's where he got it from. Okay, it's been around for thousands of years. And using this star cut diagram or golden mandala, you can divide up the sides of the square into equal parts, halves, thirds, quarters, eighths, even sevenths and 11ths. And Adam Tetlow did a book on this too, and studied this. And so he's from the same school, of course, that I went to. And this is how the geometry is applied both in the Americas and in the Middle East, okay, which proves that there's transoceanic connections. This is the Aztec calendar stone, which is over 10 feet, probably 12 feet in diameter, a huge stone. And this is the simple geometry. I went into it in more detail also, which I have other figures of, but this is the basic geometry in this drawing. And you can see how it gives you the basic center circles. Now where the lines cross gives what I call nodes. And those are the key points in measuring things and laying out the geometry. And you can see that in this figure. Even a lot of the angles on the Aztec calendar stone match the angles of this figure as well.
This may be one of the ancient great secrets that was hidden for some time. Many think this
Yeah.
just reappeared in the Renaissance, but it's looking like this may have been the ancient technique that was actually used, because as you say, it allows you to divide things in so many different possible ways. No, it's great. So here,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about the Dendera zodiac in the mandala.
Okay, now what you have to understand is I worked with archaeologist Garth Norman. He passed away a year and a half ago, but we measured ancient statues in the Louvre Museum, the National Gallery in London, and different museums and other places as well, the British Museum as well, okay? And we found out that they were using the same cubit measurements in Mesoamerica as they were using in the Middle East and in Egypt, in ancient Babylon and all those ancient civilizations. And so this is the zodiac of Dendera. It's in the ceiling of one of the rooms in the Louvre Museum in Paris. And this drawing that I'm using here was done by one of Napoleon's artists when he went to Egypt. He was conquering all these areas. They did this exact accurate drawing of the zodiac of Dendera. So I used this drawing, and the same geometry fits it. Notice where the nodes are and where the lines cross. It gives you the center circle. And these are the stars and the signs of the zodiac and everything in the center. So this is really a star chart, if you want to get down to it.
It's amazing how it aligns up so perfectly, Lance, with these circles, with the nodes. I mean, it's incredible. And I saw some other examples with Tetlow. Yeah, it's amazing. So here you're using it with the Great Pyramid. Tell us a little bit about this very interesting drawing.
Okay, I got into ancient squared circle geometry, and I used the same diagram because I can come up with very close approximations to a square and a circle with equal area, equal circumference and perimeter, and a circle inside of a square and a circle around a square touching at the corners. And that is the basis for the design of the Great Pyramid. And even some of the same angles fit the half diagonals, half diagonal of the diagram.
And you can use your cursor if you wish to show anything.
There's a half diagonal here over the Great Pyramid, one there.
I think you have to click it first.
Yeah, okay. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
And I have a cross section of the face of the Great Pyramid in here, the 51-degree angle, just over 51 degrees. And the golden triangle is in there, the height square root of the golden section, the hypotenuse golden section, and the base 1. And so that's part of the geometry. And then this red line over here is a cross section of the corners through the Great Pyramid. And that gives you approximately a 42-degree angle, which is related to phi also, because if you take 360 degrees, divide it by phi, you get 222.5. And using the half circle that the pyramid fits in, you subtract 180 degrees, and that gives you 42.5 degrees. And that angle is really significant because 51 degrees and 42 degrees are the same angles that we see the double arc of a rainbow with the sun behind us. Now, I can't explain how the Egyptians knew that or if they even knew that, but it's the same angles. And I don't think it's coincidence. Now, you have to realize that in modern times, we have all this great technology and science, but we've lost a lot of this ancient knowledge that they knew about, ancient wisdom, ancient knowledge and things. And that's why I study ancient geometry and try to look into the past, study these things.
So here you're using it with Solomon's Temple. This is a brilliant plan and section, I believe, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a ground plan and a vertical cross section of Solomon's Temple. And I did research from other people and then applied this geometry to it. We did a lot of research on the Temple Mount. We had to pretend to be tourists because you're not allowed to do research on the Temple Mount. But we were there on the day of Passover, April the 6th, 2008. And all the guards got up and left, and we had the whole Temple Mount to ourselves to study where we thought the temple sat. We came up with a whole new theory where we think the temple sat on the north side of the Dome of the Rock and everything. But this drawing here, you notice the two pillars of Jachin and Boaz on the front porch here, and then a ground plan measured in cubit measurements. and it gives you the basic foundation plan.
Yeah.
40 by 80 for the main foundation of the building, and then 50 by 100 for the whole foundation in cubits. And then the cubit divisions in the foundation from a vertical view, and then these side rooms on the temple.
So we will be working with the students to teach them all about this, how it breaks down.
Yeah,
And this is amazing. It really, it will take quite a bit to talk this through. Let's go then to some of your Egyptian canons, the early one and the later one, and then Vitruvian Man.
yeah, I studied all the cubits in the Bible. I know they were using the Egyptian royal cubit and the Assyrian Babylonian cubit, and those were the main two cubits they were using. And I found those on ancient statues and Egyptian statues and so on. Now on the left here, you'll see the first Egyptian canon, which goes clear back to, thousands of years, at least to 2000 BC. It's probably older. And the Egyptians used this most of the time. It was the human figure divided up into thirds, 6 units to the top of the knees, 6 more to the elbows, 6 more to the forehead is where they measured from in the original canon. And then they divided that into 24 palms and 30 head fourths, and 18 fist units they're referred to is 18 units to the same measuring point in the forehead. But when you locate the navel and the belly just above the belt here, it's at 11 units. So 18 divided by 11, those are the Lucas golden section numbers. So the Egyptians, I believe, knew about the golden section and were using it, because there's other ways you can get the golden section, of course, with the root 5 diagonal, a half diagonal of a square. And I think they knew all about the golden section, just my personal opinion.
So let me add in, this is really, really amazing, because Lucas numbers were not supposed to have been discovered until the 19th century, Edward Lucas.
Yeah.
However, this is the first Egyptian canon, going back into the first to the 19th, at least the 19th dynasty. And they're using Lucas numbers, which is incredible. And the later, as you're going to point out, I'm sure, we're going to have Fibonacci numbers over here, and that's the later one.
Yeah, and the other thing is the head fourths, the palm measurements, and the fist measurements are all based on the proportions of 3, 4, and 5 too, which come out of the same diagram. And then over here on the right, you have the second Egyptian canon, their late canon. It's divided into 21 units to the bridge of the nose where the eyes are. And it was also divided into 24 palms and 28 head fourths. And it had similar measurements, and 21 units, of course, to the eye. But they also had it divided into 24 palms, excuse me, and so on. And but there, the navel on this figure, just above the belt, is located at 13 of the 21 units up. And those 13 to 21 ratio, that's the golden section in the Fibonacci numbers.
So
Okay.
21 divided by 13 is a Fibonacci approximation to the golden ratio. So again, they're using Lucas on the one hand, Fibonacci on the other. Just amazing.
Yeah, and so I took both these proportions. I have 5 different models for the Vitruvian Man, and I combined them all into one. 10 to 8 head heights, which is 5 to 4 cubits. 8 to 6 feet is the other one I used. And 12 to 10 face heights or hand lengths is the other model.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a model where the circumference is equal to the perimeter of the square. And then I have the golden section model where I divide the height 31.416 head fourths, or 10 times pi, by the golden section, and I get 19.416 divided by 12. And that's a perfect golden section ratio, which I show with the lines on the left. The lines on the right are all the Vitruvian measurements of head heights, cubits, and palms and everything on the right.
Okay,
And,
so we'll be developing this in the workshop. But again, you based it on both the golden ratio and on pi as well.
Yeah, pi represents the perfect stature of the ideal man, which is actually based on a circle. And the golden section, being the center of the circle at the navel, that represents a rebirth, just like the word Renaissance in Leonardo da Vinci's drawing represents the rebirth. So it's a symbolic rebirth and represents the divine nature of the ideal man.
Okay, we'll move on to the next.
Yeah, go ahead.
And Here we have the double triangle of Polyclitus.
Okay, when I visited the monastery in Parowan, Germany, I studied Father Desiderius Lenz, and he was a monk, but he was also an architect and an artist. He studied the ancient Egyptian canons and the ancient Greek canon of the human body, and he came up with this geometry, and I don't know where he got it all from. I know he spent time at Monte Cassino, Italy, and Florence, and he may have come across some ancient writings to figure this out, but he started applying it to Greek statues. You can see this ancient statue here of Greek. It's divided into what's called the double triangle of Polyclitus, which is over here on the left, a 2-to-1 proportion, or the octave ratio. But that's found also in 6, 6, 12 to 6, in a smaller triangle that fits in the shoulders and goes down here to the top of the knees with the center at the crotch.
Can you use your cursor if you're showing something?
Yeah, there's the navel there. Here's
click it so you can see it.
Yeah, here's the crotch here. Here's the navel here. And this same 2 triangles in the 2-to-1 ratio are repeated at least 3 and 4 times in this diagram. And you can notice the smaller ones in there. There's one between the arm joints down to the navel, down to the leg joints, a smaller one, 2-to-1 ratio. And then you have the larger one from the neck and down to the crotch, and then down to the to the knee, top of the knees. So those triangles are repeated over and over again in the design of ancient Greek statues. On the right here, you have a canon statue by Polyclitus, or Doryphus, known as the spear bearer, and it's in a contrapposto position where he's got his weight on one leg and lifting the other leg, and his neck is slightly bent. And that's what the ancient Greeks did in their statues to give them more lifelike poses. But when I place the geometry over it, it still fits. Okay. And even using some of the points in the geometry, like the tilt of the head here, I came up with the angle of the tilt of the head and the angle of the tilt of the hips down here. But it's the same geometry, the same measurements across the shoulders and the hips, and everything is found in this geometry. But it's in a contrapposto movement position. Of course, this statue is 7 heads tall in the Doryphus statue. This one here is like 7 3/4 heads. They always had their statues between 8 and 7 heads tall.
Gotcha. Okay. And then the Desiderian canon.
Yeah, Father Desiderius, Peter Lenz was his real name. He studied the ancient Greek canon, as I mentioned before, and the Egyptian canon. And then he applied it to his Christian beliefs too, okay? But he also did drawings of the Greek statues and studied them. He studied the golden section, by the way. When I went to the monastery in Parowan, Germany and lived there, he had all kinds of drawings of his study on the golden ratio. And but anyway, and this represents Adam and Eve with the tree of life, also representing the tree of knowledge of good and evil, with a serpent down here representing Satan. And you notice they're standing in a Vesica Pisces shape based on the root 3, which is derived from the equilateral triangle. And in the male figure, all of his triangles are on the 2-to-1 octave proportion. Okay, just like the Greek statues that Desiderius drew. But then in the female figure, to give her wider hips and a larger, what's called the womb circle, as well as her torso or chest circle, you notice there's 2 circles around her chest area, her upper torso. And that's because I started with the male circle, and then I changed it by the symbolic width of a rib that you see right there, and enlarged her womb circle to match her upper circle. And they are in golden proportion to each other. And Father Desiderius describes how he did this, and that gave her the larger womb circle for giving birth, and narrower shoulders, but wider hips.
Fascinating,
We had this all worked out geometrically. It was really amazing.
It is amazing.
And I went into the Hebrew Kabbalistic tree of life because it's based on the same geometry. And I just made a couple of changes here to line up with the human figure. So I raised it did away with that or knowledge, because that's more has to do with the creation and the fall of Adam and Eve and so on. But I raised it up so that I could focus my drawing on the head, the crown, the heart, and the loins, which represents the ancient philosophy of the true, the good, and the beautiful. The head was metaphysics, the heart was aesthetics, and the loins were ethics. And I call that logos, pathos, and ethos in ancient Greek terms. And so I was able to apply, move up Tiferet, I can't pronounce all the words, Yesod, and just move it up.
You moved
so
east
that,
side, yeah.
yeah, so that it relates to the heart, the head, the heart, and the loins. In Christian theology, that was called the light, the life, and the love, or the light, the love, and the life.
So this would be a Christianized version of the Kabbalah, this one that you've done.
Yeah, I grew up a Christian.
Yeah.
I also
No, that's there's nothing wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, but I study other religions too. Remember that, okay? I had a
Yeah,
lot of
absolutely.
Islamic friends, and when I went to Jerusalem, I got interested in the Jewish teachings on the Temple Mount. And so I'm really interested in, especially in the three Abrahamic religions. And then I applied the Fibonacci numbers to the same figure over here on the left, because I made the man 31.416 head fourths, or 10 times pi, and that squared equals 987. And 19 point, when you divide it by the golden section, 19.416 squared gives you another Fibonacci number. And 144, of course, is 12 squared. And anyway, 377 is one of the divisions. Anyway, I have the Fibonacci's on the left.
Yeah.
But I also use the Lucas numbers a lot. And I add the Fibonacci numbers, add them together with the Lucas numbers, and I get what I call the Egyptian numbers in the center, which tie in with pi and those other figures I talked about, 10 times pi, and divide that by the golden section, 19.416 and 12, and 7.416 is the cubit measurement, and that's the square root of 55.
Okay, so these are things that are going to be taught to our students. Amazing. Now you see Keith Critchlow, when he came actually to Ocala, Florida, and did one of his Cairo summer schools, you see that he's working also with the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, actually with Chartres Cathedral.
He's using the exact same geometry and applied it to the ground plan of the cathedral, as well as the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. So,
and then most recently, I did my presentation for the Esoteric Quest to Portugal, Platonic Principles in High Medieval Churches. Steve Bass kind of joined in and gave a little special contribution on it. But we really were honoring Keith. This photograph's the last time I saw Keith in London. And then here's John Michel speaking at the actually at the first Esoteric Quest in Český Krumlov, and then here we're at one of the Cairo summer schools. But we honored these two individuals, and they had these very interesting positions that we drew out, and they're related to our workshop, closely related. So Keith has the view that the triangle, or root 3, the square, root 2, and the pentagon, or golden ratio, recur consistently throughout the proportioning of the great sacred buildings of mankind. Well, secondly, John Michel's position is that the physical embodiment of these Platonic principles, so these are coming directly from Plato's Timaeus out into the public. He hid some of it, but it's there for those who have eyes to see, that these Platonic principles put into the temples and also the esoteric teaching, sacred geometry in general, link human beings to the cosmos. So we humans are like the microcosm. There's the macrocosm, the divine, and then the mesocosm is what he's really talking about. So when he says man, temple, and cosmos were therefore seen to be identical in the sense they're self-similar, and there's resonance, and there's proportion. That's what our sacred geometry workshop is going to be all about, is going into resonance, into proportion with this, with the wisdom of the divine source. So here from a Cairo summer school retreat in 2004, you see the diagram. Keith Critchlow was working on this, and Lance did this nice drawing at a workshop that Keith was giving. And so we got a hold of this. And so I'll just show you, thank heavens, Lance, that you did this so that we could take it and animate it. So first of all, with a radius of 1, you see the circle here. And of course, that the diameter would be 2. So here you have a square surrounding the circle, square of sides of 2. And then here in the center, we put a square of 1 on each side. We rotate it. And so we take the square root of 2 to get another square whose sides are now root 2. And of course, that's what we call ad quadratum or quadrature. Just an example of this, you can grow things or you can reduce them, diminish them using quadrature, pentature, octature. There are different ways of doing it. So then we take and do vesica Pisces on both sides. So if that's 1, then we're going to have root 3. And so we can get our root 3 rectangle, as Keith did in this geometry. And then, of course, if we cut it in half and then bisect an equilateral triangle, we have root 3 going on as well. So the same thing. Then we take a double square. So this is 2, so double square, and we take a diagonal of the double square. This is exactly what Keith was doing to try to develop the geometry of cathedral building. And so we take that, rotate it around, and he gets us another circle whose diameter is the square root of 5. That gives us a root 5 rectangle. And so automatically, Keith, in his development here, has a root 3 rectangle, a root 2 square, and a root 5 rectangle. And then we go a step further. We take and rotate. So now we have our root 5 rectangle. So the distance across the top here is square root of 5, and the edge is 1. Now we're going to cut this in half. So we're taking half of root 5, and we're going to add 1/2 in, and bingo, you see what Keith has here is your golden rectangle. So that's also built in with it. This is all going to be part of the teaching that we work with you on. Now, what the ancients were doing, and this is something Melody and I brought out in the recent Esoterica article we did on sacred geometry, theosophy, and transformation of consciousness, is they were teaching the quadrivium. Here, by the way, is Sophia, and in the Middle Ages becomes Virgin Mary with the trivium and the quadrivium. Trivium, of course, is added. It's the logic, rhetoric, and grammar, but the 4 mathematical disciplines were arithmetic, pure number, harmonics, number in time or music, geometry, number in space, and then spherics, number in space and time. This was preparing the student for initiation. Ultimately, one wanted to go through the transformation of consciousness process, and they would do it in the Eleusinian mysteries. And we think that we can accomplish these things through the proper study of sacred geometry and preparation. And then this is where Melody comes in and really grounds us with Mother Nature and understanding how these things are interrelated with the sciences, with the DNA structure. And of course, then it's all about transformation of consciousness. That's what we're all about in this workshop, is to transform consciousness, not simply get the right non-dominant hemisphere going and shut down the left. No, 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 no. We want a balance. We want both of them cooking fully on all cylinders. And this is what Edgar Mitchell had to say, the great astronaut, on the way back from the moon when he went into samadhi. That is the ultimate goal, is the transformation. He says the following: I experienced a grand epiphany accompanied by exhilaration, an overwhelming sense of universal interconnectedness, an ecstasy of unity, and there was the sense that our presence and the existence of the universe itself was not accidental, but there was an intelligent process at work. I perceived the universe as in some way conscious. From that moment on, my life was irrevocably altered. That's our goal with our sacred geometry, is to prepare us all for transformation of experience. So again, we are doing this with a new approach linked to initiation in the ancient mystery schools. Our goal is a grand unification of the sciences, arts, and consciousness. Thank you. Thank you, Lance.
Yeah, thank you.
Any comments from the peanut gallery?
Thanks, Lance and Scott.
There we go.
So Melody, you've worked quite a bit with children and sacred geometry. What, in your opinion, what do children get out of learning sacred geometry?
To be honest, it is about bio-inspiration, bio-learning. So totally connected with nature, aligning with nature with children. And sacred geometry, especially with the adults, and totally about the pure geometry connection and the connection of the three-dimensional and more dimensional way of understanding the geometry of life. And as I'm an architect, so I'm looking to the space connection and bringing that space connection, as Scott and Lance mentioned, like the temple. So the microcosmos and microcosmos connection. So I'm trying this, and as we mentioned in our previous workshop, like the transformation of consciousness is starting from us. So it will change the world as well, from the sentence of Krishnamurti. So I'm trying to serve for this, definitely.
Could I add in just a quick comment on that, Raj? I've done a lot of work with children, and children who have been attention deficit disorder, problem children. And it's really interesting when you give them like a kit of platonic solids to build. There's something that happens, they go into resonance, and that's also part of our position, all three of us, all four of us actually, is that everything is vibratory, everything is resonance. When they go into resonance with these perfect forms and shapes, they are happy, they quiet down, they don't become problems, and it really is probably how we should be teaching mathematics, to tell you the truth, as patterns and going into rhythm. Yeah.
Yeah, I would love to add, like last year I did a workshop called One with Nature, One for Earth. And in that one, we did a dodecahedron from a two-dimensional plane to three-dimensional with the children from 8 to 12. And we built the Earth on it. And it was really amazing how they interact with that Earth. So it is really, as Scott mentioned, so it's really with the Platonic solids, it's really connecting with our own beings. So it's really powerful. So I'm really mixing with nature and the sacred geometry for children, definitely.
Great. Hey, well, thanks, guys. Wonderful to get back with you all again. And I'm looking forward to hosting you all here in August, New York City. And folks will find all the details on the, the course notes below this. So, and we do have an early booking discount coming up, and there are some scholarships available too. So you can always email the school, Academy Healing Nutrition, info@, and I can give you the details about the scholarships. So,
and also Academy Sacred Geometry, right?
Sorry, Academy Sacred Geometry. I run the two schools, so sometimes I get mixed up. So guys, great seeing you again, and see you in good old the Big Apple in August. Bye for now.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you,
Thank you
Lance.
so much, Scott, Lance. It was wonderful.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Melanie.
thank you.
Okay.
Melody, you're really good. So.